In 2002, the Pentagon initiated the most expensive, elaborate military wargame in human history. A retired Marine general was tasked with commanding a fictional Middle Eastern adversary fleet. He bypassed their advanced digital surveillance using motorcycle couriers and launched a massive swarm of cheap speedboats. In less than 10 minutes, he sank a U.S. aircraft carrier and 15 advanced warships. The simulation proved a terrifying reality. In the Persian Gulf, a billion-dollar navy is nothing but a massive target. The kill chain. Today, we leave the impenetrable Zagros Mountains behind and enter a completely different type of battlefield. Welcome to the Strait of Hormuz, the most militarized, heavily trafficked, and strategically vital body of water on the planet. It is an incredibly narrow maritime choke point, wedged between the jagged Iranian coastline to the north and Oman to the south. To understand the sheer vulnerability of the United States Navy in this environment, one must understand the absolute tyranny of geography. The U.S. Navy is a blue water force. It was designed to dominate the vast, open expanses of the Pacific and Atlantic Oceans. In the open ocean, an aircraft carrier uses hundreds of miles of deep water as its primary defensive shield. It detects threats from over the horizon, intercepting enemy aircraft and missiles with layers of defense before they ever get close. But the Strait of Hormuz strips away every single one of those defensive advantages. It is a brown water nightmare. At its narrowest point, the strait is only 21 miles wide. The deepwater shipping lanes themselves are merely 2 miles across. For a billion-dollar, 100,000-ton supercarrier, navigating these waters is like maneuvering a limousine through a crowded, dark alleyway. And waiting in the shadows of that alleyway is the naval branch of the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps. The IRGC recognized decades ago that trying to build destroyers or cruisers to match the Americans would be an exercise in futility. A large Iranian frigate would simply become a target for an American Tomahawk missile within the first hour of a conflict. So just as they did in the Zagros Mountains, they radically rewrote the rules of engagement. They embraced asymmetry. Instead of investing billions into a single, vulnerable ship, they poured their resources into thousands of tiny, lethal platforms. The core of this strategy relies on the terrifying mathematics of the swarm. The U.S. Navy's Aegis combat system is a technological marvel, capable of tracking and destroying dozens of sophisticated incoming missiles simultaneously. But the Aegis system was designed to fight advanced Soviet bombers and supersonic anti-ship missiles. It was not designed for this. The IRGC doctrine relies on coastal concealment. Thousands of these armed speedboats are hidden in camouflaged coves and civilian marinas along the jagged coast. When a high-value American target enters the choke point, the trap is triggered. They do not attack as a coordinated naval squadron. They attack like a pack of wolves. Dozens, perhaps hundreds of speedboats rushing the carrier from every conceivable angle simultaneously. These boats are heavily armed with heavy machine guns, unguided rockets, and most dangerously, anti-ship cruise missiles. The goal is not to sink the carrier with a single massive blow. The goal is sensory overload, system saturation. If a U.S. destroyer has 90 interceptor missiles, the IRGC will fire 120 cheap rockets. It is simple, brutal arithmetic. And while the surface fleet desperately fights off the chaotic swarm, the true, silent killers are slipping quietly into the depths beneath them. To understand the underwater threat, one must realize that the Persian Gulf is an absolute acoustic nightmare for modern anti-submarine warfare. It is incredibly shallow, with an average depth of just 50 meters. The water is highly saline, filled with unpredictable thermal layers that bend and severely distort sonar waves. Add to that the deafening, continuous background noise of thousands of massive commercial oil tankers, grinding their colossal propellers day and night. In this chaotic acoustic soup, the world's most advanced nuclear attack submarines are rendered practically deaf and blind. But Iran's submarines are custom-built for this exact environment. The IRGC operates a fleet of Ghadir-class midget submarines. At just 29 meters long, their tiny acoustic signature is nearly impossible to detect on conventional sonar. They do not need to cross the open ocean. They only need to sink to the shallow bottom of the strait, running silently on battery power and weight. When a billion-dollar American destroyer passes overhead, the Ghadir can unleash heavyweight, wake-homing torpedoes designed to break a warship's keel perfectly in half. But their most strategically devastating payload isn't a torpedo at all. It is the silent, undetected deployment of smart naval mines. During the Iran-Iraq War, the USS Samuel B. Roberts struck a single, cheap Iranian contact mine. It blew a 15-foot hole in the hull and nearly sank the frigate. Today, the IRGC possesses an estimated inventory of over 5,000 advanced naval mines, a stockpile designed to shut down the strait entirely. These are not the floating, spiked iron spheres of the Second World War. These are sophisticated, multi-influence bottom mines. They rest invisibly on the seabed, programmed with onboard computers to ignore small civilian boats, waiting specifically for the massive magnetic signature of a U.S. aircraft carrier. Dropped at night from speedboats, commercial dhows, and submarines, these mines can turn the narrow shipping lanes of Hormuz into an impassable, explosive graveyard in hours. Clearing this minefield requires slow, highly vulnerable minesweeping ships and helicopters, completely exposing them to the coastal anti-ship missile batteries hidden in the cliffs. It is a perfectly interlocking defensive web. The mines stop the ships, the coastal missiles destroy the stationary ships, and the speedboat swarm overwhelms the survivors. If this sounds like a theoretical, paranoid worst-case scenario, the Pentagon has already proven that it is entirely possible. In 2002, the U.S. military held Millennium Challenge, a massive $250 million wargame simulating an invasion of a Middle Eastern nation resembling Iran. Lieutenant General Paul Van Riper, commanding the opposing Red Force, fully understood the fatal weaknesses of the American high-tech armada operating in confined waters. Knowing his radio communications would be intercepted by the NSA, he used motorcycle couriers to silently deliver his attack orders to the coastal commanders. Then he unleashed a synchronized preemptive strike. A massive swarm of speedboats, low-flying aircraft, and cruise missiles simultaneously overwhelmed the Aegis combat systems. In the simulation, 16 American warships, including a nuclear aircraft carrier, were sent to the bottom of the Persian Gulf. Over 20,000 fictional U.S. personnel were killed in minutes. The Pentagon was so horrified by this catastrophic defeat that they paused the wargame, magically refloated the sunken ships, and severely restricted the Red Team's asymmetric tactics so America could win. But in the real waters of the Strait of Hormuz, there is no reset button. And since 2002, The IRGC has spent 2 decades perfecting that exact swarm tactic. In recent years, they have integrated advanced autonomous technology into their asymmetric fleet, completely removing the human element from the point of impact. They now deploy unmanned surface vessels, drone boats packed with high explosives, capable of loitering in the Gulf and executing coordinated kamikaze strikes without risking a single Iranian sailor. The IRGC Navy has also modernized its command structure, unveiling the Shahid Soleimani-class catamaran corvettes. These stealthy, radar-evading ships act as mobile command nodes, coordinating the speedboat swarms while armed with their own vertical launch cruise missiles. And the threat extends beyond traditional warships. The IRGC has begun converting massive commercial container ships into floating expeditionary sea bases. Vessels like the Shahid Mahdavi look like ordinary civilian cargo ships from a distance, but they conceal long-range anti-ship ballistic missiles hidden perfectly inside standard shipping containers. A U.S. carrier strike group entering the Gulf would not just be fighting a navy. They would be fighting the geography, the commercial traffic, the seabed, and the very air above them. To understand the catastrophic implications of this asymmetric doctrine, we must walk through the nightmare scenario. A geopolitical tripwire is crossed, a vital commercial oil tanker is struck, and global energy markets immediately enter a state of freefall. In response, the President of the United States orders a carrier strike group to transit the Strait of Hormuz to restore the freedom of navigation. As the massive, 100,000-ton warship approaches the 21-mile choke point, the psychological warfare begins instantly. A cheap, unarmed Iranian surveillance drone buzzes just a few hundred feet above the carrier's flight deck, transmitting live video back to Tehran. The drone is a blatant provocation, a reminder that the American fleet is being watched, targeted, and mathematically measured. Inside the darkened Combat Information Center of the escorting Aegis cruisers, the atmosphere is suffocatingly tense. The radar screens are flooded with hundreds of civilian fishing dhows, oil tankers, and coastal clutter. A chaotic, noisy environment perfectly suited for an ambush. Suddenly, the electronic warfare sensors scream. Multiple shore-based targeting radars along the jagged Iranian coastline have just gone active. The trap is sprung. From dozens of camouflaged coastal caves and hidden civilian marinas, the IRGC unleashes the swarm. Wave 1 does not come from the water, it comes from the sky, a massive volley of low-flying Shahid kamikaze drones. The Aegis combat system immediately responds, automatically firing a barrage of highly advanced, multi-million-dollar interceptor missiles. Brilliant flashes of light fill the sky as the interceptors shred the drones, but it is a catastrophic economic exchange. A $2 million missile to destroy a $20,000 drone. And the drones were merely the distraction. While the American radar is looking up, the true threat is skimming the waves. A volley of sea-skimming anti-ship cruise missiles, launched from converted civilian trucks hiding in the coastal mountains, break the horizon. The American fleet's outer defensive perimeter is now entirely saturated. The Aegis system is tracking hundreds of incoming threats simultaneously. Then the speedboats arrive, dozens of Boghammer fast-attack craft closing the distance at over 50 knots. They do not fire sophisticated guided weapons. They fire dumb rockets and heavy machine guns, aiming directly for the carrier's exposed flight deck and sensitive radar arrays. The U.S. Navy's last line of defense, The phalanx close-in weapon system spins to life, unleashing a deafening wall of depleted uranium rounds. The water around the fleet boils with explosions. Speedboats are vaporized by the American rotary cannons, but there are simply too many of them. In the chaos, an unmanned, explosive-laden drone boat slips through the defensive screen, aiming directly for the waterline of a billion-dollar destroyer. The carrier's captain screams for evasive maneuvers. The 100,000-ton behemoth tries to turn, but the channel is only 2 miles wide. If they turn too sharply, they run aground on the treacherous reefs. If they maintain course, they sail directly into the teeth of the swarm. And then the most terrifying word is spoken in the Combat Information Center: Winchester. A U.S. destroyer carries a finite number of interceptor missiles in its vertical launch tubes. They cannot be reloaded at sea. The IRGC knows the exact mathematical capacity of the American fleet. They simply sent more targets than the Americans had bullets. A billion-dollar defense, defeated by basic math. The Aegis combat system is a technological marvel, tracking hundreds of targets, but it has a hard mathematical limit. The radar is saturated, the interceptors are gone, and the swarm is now inside the minimum engagement zone. The final strike is unavoidable. A Nor anti-ship cruise missile slams into the superstructure of the Arleigh Burke-class destroyer. The impact is catastrophic. Shrapnel tears through the radar panels. Secondary explosions rip through the ship's vital communication lines. The destroyer is instantly blinded and deafened. With the escort ships crippled, the swarm focuses entirely on the crown jewel of the American fleet, the nuclear supercarrier. Dozens of kamikaze drones plunge onto the massive, flat flight deck, obliterating parked F-18 fighters before they can even launch. Desperate to maneuver away from the burning wrecks, the carrier's helmsman orders a hard rudder shift, driving the colossal ship toward the edge of the shipping lane. But the IRGC anticipated this exact, desperate maneuver. They steered the behemoth right into the invisible minefield. A massive, multi-influence bottom mine detects the overwhelming magnetic signature of 100,000 tons of American steel passing directly overhead. The detonation unleashes a supersonic shockwave of displaced water, slamming into the keel of the aircraft carrier with the force of an earthquake. On the surface, a massive geyser of white water and shredded steel erupts alongside the flight deck. The mighty warship shudders violently, losing all forward propulsion. In the chaos, the silent killers arrive. Iranian Ghadir-class midget submarines, resting completely undetected in the shallow mud, unleash heavyweight torpedoes into the crippled fleet. Within 30 minutes, the most powerful concentration of naval power on Earth has been reduced to a disorganized, burning graveyard of metal. The Strait of Hormuz is effectively closed, not by a symmetrical naval superpower, but by physics, geometry, and ruthless asymmetry. The economic shockwave hits the globe before the smoke even clears. Brent crude oil prices triple in a matter of hours. Global supply chains freeze. Economies heavily dependent on Middle Eastern energy imports face immediate, paralyzing energy rationing. Back in the Pentagon, military planners stare at the simulation boards in absolute, stunned silence. Millennium Challenge 2002 was not a flawed wargame. It was a prophecy. The chilling historical truth of the Persian Gulf is this: American naval supremacy, unquestioned since the end of the Second World War, cannot survive in a 21-mile ditch. The Iranian Revolutionary Guard Corps, did not build a navy to conquer the ocean. They built a deadly, interlocking machine simply to deny access to it. It is the ultimate expression of anti-access and area denial, a strategy designed to make the geopolitical cost of intervention entirely unbearable. The U.S. military is built to fight fair, symmetrical wars on open battlefields. The IRGC is built to ensure a fair war never happens. The land invasion is a logistical suicide mission. The naval strike is a catastrophic trap. The conventional forces are completely stalemated. But for the United States, walking away is not an option. If the earth and the sea belong to Iran, the Pentagon has only one domain left to dominate: the sky. To break the stalemate, Washington must unleash an unprecedented campaign of strategic bombing, targeting the very heart of the Iranian regime. They must aim for the nuclear facilities buried deep inside the mountains. They must strike the head of the snake. But Tehran has anticipated this exact escalation for 30 years. Deep beneath the earth, in the sprawling, impenetrable subterranean missile cities, the sirens begin to wail. They are not waiting for the American bombs to fall. The IRGC is preparing to ignite the entire Middle East. A sprawling network of proxy militias, sleeper cells, and hypersonic missiles are armed and ready to strike every U.S. base from Iraq to Israel. The naval battle is over. The doomsday clock is ticking.